So we're going to go now. Well, in just a minute, we're going to go to our last garden. And after that, we'll go to music in the gardens. I hope you stay with us right through the end. We have a really nice finale for this Sunday again. So let us go now to our last garden of the day. And this is Arti Kirch and Cindy Siegel's garden. They live in Concord. And this is the before photo of their back garden, which is large. It's 7,000 square feet and 75% native. Arti and Cindy bought this house in 2010 because of the large lot. At that time, the front and backyards were mostly non-native ornamentals and lawn. However, the property held 4 mature native oaks and it bordered on open space. Arti and Cindy spent 5 years making lists, looking at other gardens, studying the shade patterns and water movement on the property, and acquiring plants. They also realized, as they said, that they couldn't design their way out of a paper bag. They hired Roxy Designs to imagine a native garden for the backyard that met 3 criteria. It needed to be useful, practical, and beautiful. So let's go now and tour this garden with Arti and Cindy. Just one sec. And hello, Arti. How are you? We're live.
Hi, Kathy. And we're doing great.
Okay, good. Well, do you ready to take us on a tour of your garden?
Absolutely. And with all due respect to all the other fabulous gardens, I think you saved the best for last. Anyways, Kathy, again, thank you for the excellent introduction and for inviting us to be on this really renowned annual event. And to everyone who's watching, including those east of the Mississippi, hey, and to native plant lovers everywhere, welcome to our garden. We affectionately refer to it as variously the National Park or the best show in town. I also want to thank Cindy, my wife, without whom none of this would be possible. And she just waved. That was her hand in the way. And she's doing the filming. So we're going to talk about 4 things today. Just a few more property details, how we chose our plants, our gardening ethics, but mostly we're going to stick to plants and some of the stories thrown in. Okay, so just one caveat before I start. I am a little nervous, not sure if I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille, so please forgive any mistakes or misstatements. They are all my own. And so, as Voltaire said in Candide, all that is very well, but let us cultivate our garden, so let's go on a tour of the garden. And the first plant that we're going to focus on is the island snapdragon. And Cindy's going to focus in on this flower. It is flowering now. Flowers has a very long bloom period. It is native to the California Channel Islands off the Santa Barbara coast. This year has been the best bloom year yet. I was warned that they could be shy bloomers, and that was true until this year. And of course, I have no idea why, but it's like just went to town this year. It's been very popular with hummingbirds, especially Allen's. It was visited by, and a Rufus gave it a try to take it over. Okay, so we're going to start walking through the garden, and a few other property details, as I mentioned. As you'll see while we walk around the garden, it's a flat lot, and gladly it has no drainage issues. It is clay soil, but the water doesn't stand here long. The lot is about 85 feet wide and 185 feet long, and it runs north and south lengthwise. So the way Cindy's facing right now is facing south. And just for comparison's sake, a semi-tractor trailer is about 75 feet long. So that tells you we have kind of a narrow lot, but it's long. One thing, I think it's important to understand where you live in real life, and especially your watershed, given the critical nature of water here in California. Our property is actually in the Pine Creek watershed, but we're actually closest to Mount Diablo Creek, which is partly fed by Donner Creek, which is where the falls are. And before we go to the next plant, you're going to hear me refer to Mount Diablo again today. It's an inspiration to me as an amateur naturalist, but it's also a way that anyone can see and learn about a lot of California natives in their native settings. And it's practically in our backyard here in Contra Costa County. And if you see something there that you'd like take a photo and bring it to any one of the fine nurseries that are listed on the Bringing Back the Natives website. All right, so the next plant that we're going to take a quick look at is this, and this is called Colville's lip fern. And you heard me right, it's a fern, and I love rule breakers, and this guy is a rule breaker because most ferns love it where it's shady and moist and a lot of humus. But the lip fern defies all that. It grows where it's hot and dry and rocky. And there's a really great specimen, several specimens of it up on the Mary Bowerman Trail, which is at the summit of Mount Diablo State Park. Our next plant, I had to have it because that is the plant that, Kathy, I think you have a picture of that. It produces these puffy red flowers that are just, to me, unmistakable and irreplaceable. And I had to have a plant in my garden that was named, it's called the Baja Fairy Duster, in case I didn't say that. Who doesn't need a plant in their garden named after fairies, right? Our next plant is over here to my left, and these are Clarkias. This is wine cup Clarkia, or Clarkia purpurea. It's an annual that reseeds abundantly and freely, and in fact, I collect the seed when the seeds are ready, indicated by the seed pod drying and opening. And they're very small seeds, about the size of a poppy seed, but I collect them in a bunch and say wait till the fall, and then I just broadcast them like crazy any place in the garden. And they have done well, mostly in sun, but some half sun spots have also been pretty good for them. Okay, as we move to our next plant, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we chose our plants. Kathy, as you mentioned, we have a 7,000 square foot back garden, but we only install plants in about 60% of the space, and I'll refer to that later. We did that because we have a significant tree presence. The tree biomass in the yard, the native biomass, is about 65% native, and that's 4 valley oaks. 2 of them are 80 to 100 years old, and 2 are around 30 to 60 years old. So we installed approximately 200 plants comprising 35 native species, and we chose them for their color, their foliage interest, their suitability to this site, or just because I had to have it. But they all do well in the site, even if they are not precisely locally native. So the next plant that we're going to look at is the one that turned me on to succulents, and this is a Dudleya. This one happens to be a cross with a Dudleya that grows on the Rocky Bluffs in Baja California. And just the other day, hopefully you can see this flower. So it produces these fantastic flower stalks. And just the other day, there was a hummingbird feeding on it. So they're clearly full of nectar. Right in back of it, you've seen these in other gardens today. This is the Shasta sulfur buckwheat. And it's always a hit with human visitors. It's sort of our garden signature, and it ties everything together. It sort of looks like almost like Broadway footlights in our garden. This is also, buckwheats are one of the top pollinator plants that Doug Tallamy mentioned. Doug Tallamy is the featured speaker for those who missed it, featured speaker this year for this set of garden tours. The blooms dry to a brick red in summer, which I find also just as beautiful. And I deadhead those in mid to late winter, and I used to do so very delicately. But one year I had to prune one back hard to keep it from crowding a path, and it just rebounded back better than ever. So I'm no longer so delicate with them. Okay, so Cindy's going to take us to our next tour stop, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we manage the garden. Cindy and I are the garden's primary caretakers, so we need to be able to access the beds. Actually, we're the sole caretakers, so we need to be able to access the beds and the working areas. As you hopefully can see, the paths are wide enough to easily accommodate a wheelbarrow, but they add to the garden's charm as they wind throughout the garden. They're filled with a dark red gray gravel that blends in perfectly in all seasons. This was one of the recommendations from Roxy, and she was spot on. The very popular golden material known as decomposed granite in our garden would just have glared in our hot summer sun. And speaking of working in the garden, Cindy shared an article about why people might be especially drawn to gardening now during this extraordinary period of social and economic dislocation. I quote, "The gardener is never without a purpose, a schedule, and a mission. So the garden needs you." So the next plant that Cindy's focusing on, which has also appeared in other gardens, and there's a reason for it. Obviously, it's beautiful and it's tough, and the bees right now they're all over it. And it reminds me that plants have made great stories for human beings for literally thousands of years, and this plant's no exception. It was discovered as a seedling cross between Penstemon heterophilus and Penstemon liatus at the Las Politas nursery, another famous nursery down in San Luis Obispo. And here's what they said about it. Every year it would flower and be gorgeous, clear sky blue, fading to purple, at the bottom of our front porch. We've never watered it, nor maintained it. Every year we talked about how beautiful, neat, and clean it was. The bicycles, the skateboards, and the dogs had run over it tens of times, but it still looked good at the bottom of the porch. Hence the name, Margarita Bop, B-O-P, or bottom of the porch. All right, so moving on to our next plant. This is a beautiful, hopefully, I didn't think it actually would grow well in our garden, but it's the Western Mock Orange, or Philadelphus lewisii. And California is the southern limit for this plant, and it's actually Idaho's state flower. It's actually easy to grow. It's a deciduous shrub with orange blossom fragrant flowers, blooming now. And ethnobotanically, it was pretty important. Indigenous people used it, the stems for arrows, the hardwood for hunting and fishing tools. The leaves and bark can actually contain saponins and were mixed with water for use as a mild soap. And the flowers were used in preparing perfumes and teas. And it smells literally just like an orange. All right, the next plant that I'm going to show you is not in bloom right now, and we'll get to that. Whoops, poor Cindy's got to manage her footing as well as manage keeping all the plants in the frame. This is Ribes malvaceum variety viridifolium Ortega Beauty, or to shorten it up, Ortega Beauty chaparral currant. So they say that every gardener favors one of their five senses in the garden. And for me, it's scent, and this plant is an olfactory treat. Like many California natives, especially those that have to endure hot and dry conditions, the leaves are loaded with oils, and those exude an aroma that just so happen to be very pleasant to people. Just standing here, I can smell the plant as it's wafting toward me this sweet, woody perfume that's completely reminiscent of chaparral. This is the southern version of the chaparral currant, or the Ribes malvaceum, and it's distinguished by having deep green leaves rather than the gray-green leaves of the species. And it was originally encountered in the Ortegas Mountains down south, which hence the name Ortega's Beauty. Another wonderful feature about it is that it has manzanita-like reddish-brown peeling bark. And in late winter, this is why it's not in bloom now, because it blooms in the winter, it puts on this spectacular display of large racemes of hot pink flowers. And it's one of the few plants blooming then, so it's an important food source for hummingbirds at that time of the year when not a whole lot else is in bloom. Okay, so as we move on to the next plant, I'll tell you a little bit more about what else.
Artie, we can't hear you right now.
And the primary driver really was habitat. That's our
Artie, we've lost your audio.
Oh, whoops. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. Where did I lose you?
I'm not sure, Stephanie. Do you know where we paused in the audio?
Just as you started walking over to just the last sentence, wasn't much.
Okay, good. So then I'll just keep going. So yeah, somehow my Bluetooth turned off. Sorry, thank you. Good thing you yelled because the phone was in my pocket. So this is like our second to the last stop on our garden tour. So I was about to say that we wanted a garden that was beautiful, but it had to be useful. And for us, useful equals habitat. As is true of any garden, though, some of the plants that were originally installed, they didn't survive, and a few spots were unfriendly to a succession of plants. This bed that we're looking at was notably unwelcoming. Who knows why? I don't. So, for example, we moved the mock orange, the plant with the white fragrant flowers. We moved it from here to the other bed because here it just wasn't thriving. It would produce one or two flowers and then just like kind of sat there. However, the empty space that was created by the plants that failed or were moved just gave me a chance to experiment with some favorite Southern California natives. So Cindy has.
Oops, Arti, we're just lost your video again.
Audio, that is, Arti, make sure
Audio.
you're not covering the microphone with your hand somehow.
Oh, okay, sorry. It's so.
It just kind of went really low volume. Now you're back.
Okay.
Uh-oh, now we can't hear anything.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me now?
Now you're good.
Okay. For some reason or other, Bluetooth was acting up. So if you can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. So where I was hopefully at was the plants that Cindy has in the frame, these two shrub-sized plants. The one on the right is called bladderpod. And the reason why I love it, this is one of the Southern California natives, is that it produces gobs of these just drupes with these beautiful jade green seed pods. And it also produces and flowers profusely and long, produces tons of flowers favored by, I'm watching the bees flitting all over the plant right now. It's really easy to grow. It just doesn't need any attention. You water it, you don't water it, just leave it alone, and it's good. This plant, by the way, it's got a pretty broad range, and maybe that's a reason why it is so tolerant. It ranges from in Southern California, from the coast to the Mojave. Now, the other plant that Cindy's focusing on is Rhus integrifolia, or lemonade berry. This is another mid to late winter bloomer, beautiful pink and white flowers, and foliage that as it grows and matures shades from emerald to bronze to red, and it does produce a sweet, mildly tart fruit that you can make into lemonade. I love this plant. Okay, so we're going to move to our last spot in the garden, which will give me a chance to share with you what our gardening ethics are. We think this is important because I think that we're all not just gardening, we're trying to save the world, right? So the ethics that guide us on that goal are three. One, blooms are lovely, but for us, summer dormancy is totally a-okay. I don't mind when things dry out, and I actually think it's better for the plants to experience what they evolved to do. Our second ethic, do not cultivate everything. I mentioned that we only planted about 60% of our backyard. What Cindy is showing you right now is the part of the yard that the native oaks occupy. Unfortunately, right in front of us is a Chinese pistache. There's a long story behind that, not interesting, but anyways. So this part of the yard was really left unplanted. And granted, Cindy has to get out with her weed whacker every spring to knock back the non-native grasses that blow in from the other side of the fence. But there's an ever-expanding spring crop now of miner's lettuce. And the presence of that speaks to native soil health. Plus, leaving everything mostly alone supports those insects that Doug Tallamy mentioned need to have undisturbed ground to complete their life cycle. And our last ethic is very near and dear to me. It's honor every place. There's no place that is a throwaway place. No place that is a waste. Doug Tallamy mentioned in last Sunday, had a very powerful picture of a beautiful Persian carpet. The next picture he showed was that carpet cut into pieces. And he asked, which one is a functioning, beautiful carpet? Yeah, okay, no brainer, but you get the idea. The same goes for our environment. If it's cut into pieces, it doesn't function very well. And our gardens can help stitch our environment back together. For example, the Western monarch butterfly, which is in so much trouble, it summers in the mountains and it winters on the coast. Well, your garden can be the fabric where they rest and feed their little bodies, which only weigh 1/10 of a first-class letter. So your garden does not have to be in Marin Headlands or Yosemite, but you and it can definitely celebrate California's unique and irreplaceable botanical legacy. Okay, that's it, Kathy. Sorry for all the audio problems.
No, that's all right. Artie and Cindy, thank you for being our last garden today. It was a beautiful way to finish up seeing the gardens.
Awesome, thank you.